We were on our way home after watching the new Hunger Games movie. My sister Olivia was falling asleep next to me. We were all silent, listening to the radio, when my dad suddenly came to a full stop. It took me a second to realize what he had seen. A small truck was blocking most of the road in front of us. "What's going on there?" Olivia asked in a sleepy voice. That's when a young woman stumbled out of the truck and walked around it to the side that wasn't in her vision. Her legs seemed to be hurt. She was grabbing the side of the truck to stay in balance. My parents immediately got into helper mode. Seeing a person who didn't look much older than their children, I guess she was around 20 or so. "Stephen, call 911. I'll go check if she's all right," my father said. "Maybe we should stay in the car and wait for help, honey. I've seen people tricking people into getting out of their cars and saying, 'We can't just sit here and wait, Mary. There might be someone even more hurt on the other side.'" Before my mother could say anything else, he was already stepping out of the car. My mother opened her door to follow. "Kids, lock the car and stay inside." We were stopped on a quiet road. Around us were only trees. They slowly walked towards the other side of the truck. My father called out to the stranger. After that, we didn't hear anything else. I grabbed my phone and called an ambulance. "Should we check on them?" Olivia asked after a while. "I don't know," Mom said. Before I could finish my sentence, my mother appeared from the back of the truck. Her face had lost all its color. She was walking fast and determined. When she reached the car, Olivia unlocked the doors. She sat down behind the wheel without saying a word. Her expression was eerily calm. "Mom," I whispered, "what's going on? Is someone hurt?" My mother didn't respond. And suddenly, she opened her mouth as wide as humanly possible and screamed from the top of her lungs. I unbuckled my seatbelt, leaned over, and grabbed her by the shoulder. "Mom? Mom! What happened?" Olivia shouted and grabbed her door handle. But before she could open it, my mother had locked all the doors. She stopped screaming and took a few breaths before she hit the gas and started driving in reverse. After we were so far away that we couldn't really see the truck anymore, she turned around and took a different road to our home. She didn't respond to us. She didn't answer any questions. We kept asking about Dad, but she said nothing. Next to me, Olivia started crying, and then she took out her phone to call the police again. When we reached our driveway, my mother finally unlocked the car. Still silent, she walked straight home. Olivia and I exchanged a look of fear and shock. Then she jumped to the front of the car. "I'm going back. You go inside." "No, I'm coming with you." Even from inside the car, we heard the shrill sound of my mother's scream coming from our house. We ignored it and kept driving until we found the road with the trees. I kept trying to call my dad the entire time, but it went straight to voicemail. There was a police car waiting, but no sign of a truck. One officer was waiting by the police car, and another one was looking around the side of the road. We jumped out of the car and asked where our father was. The officer told us that they arrived a few minutes ago and that there was no sign of anyone. At first, they asked us if we played a prank on them, but when he saw our concerned faces and listened to our story, he said that they would follow us home and talk to our mother. "Don't worry, we will do anything we can to find your father," he said before we went back into the car. My entire body was trembling. I had never in my life experienced anything this frightening, and I couldn't stop thinking about my dad. I hated that he didn't listen to my mom's concerns. When we reached our house, the lights in the kitchen were on. The officers followed us inside. My mother wasn't screaming anymore, but we heard the kettle in the kitchen. We followed the sound, expecting to find my mother there. I almost cried in relief when I saw that it was actually my dad. His hair was greasy, and he had changed into his pajamas. "Kids, I've been worried sick about you." He said it loudly, and then his gaze shifted to the two police officers. "Sir, are you all right?" "Dad, we've been trying to call you," "What the hell happened?" Olivia shouted, and tried to run to him, but one of the officers held her back. "I'm absolutely fine. Fantastic even, except for the fact that I had to take a taxi home. The prices of that. Sir, we need to ask you what happened to the truck and the woman inside." My dad shook his head. "She was fine. Her car just wouldn't start, so I helped her. And then she drove off. All good." "Was there anyone else with her?" My dad shook his head. "May we talk to your wife?" "She already went to bed, but I suppose we can wake her up." One of the officers walked upstairs with my father, while Olivia and I stayed in the kitchen with the other one and explained the situation one more time. When the other officer returned, he explained to us that my mother told the same story about the broken down car. Apparently, my mother remembered that the stove was still on, so she quickly drove home with us. You could hear the skepticism in his voice, but there wasn't much else they could do. They gave us their number and told us to call when anything else came up or our parents said anything. After they left, I went to touch the stove. A little after that, my mother started screaming again. I hardly slept that night. We kept asking my mom what had happened, but she didn't answer our questions. My dad just kept telling us that everything was fine and sent us to bed. Finally, my mother stopped screaming, and the house turned silent. The next morning, I walked down and heard the sound of laughter. My parents were standing in the kitchen, making pancakes without a care in the world. Olivia was already sitting by the table, staring into nothing in front of her, her expression empty. We locked eyes, and I saw that she had slept just as little as I. "Morning, honey. Did you sleep well?" My mother said it in a melodic voice. "Apparently, everything is totally fine," Olivia said in a mocking tone towards me. I sat down next to her, and my mother started stacking pancakes on a plate and walked towards me. She stopped right in front of the table and dropped the plate. The shatters flew in all directions. Suddenly, her face turned pale again. Her eyes were opened wide, and then she screamed again, looking at us the entire time. "Mom?" Olivia jumped up from her seat and grabbed her shoulders. "Everything is all right, love," my father calmly said. My mother blinked and looked at the ground. Her face relaxed. "Oh, won't you look at that? What a mess," she said, smiling at us. We went through the strangest breakfast we ever had. Olivia and I had stopped asking them what was going on. We didn't get any answers anyway. Their attempts to distract us were only frustrating and scared us more. After breakfast, I followed my sister to her room. Olivia was only a year younger than me, and we'd always been very close. I don't know how I would have dealt with this situation without her. We were both afraid of and for our parents. "What do we do?" she asked after I sat down on her desk chair. "I don't know. Should we call someone? Uncle Freddie, maybe?" We didn't have many relatives that lived nearby. Uncle Freddie was the only one, and he was still an hour's drive away. "I'm not sure if he can do anything. They are acting like everything is normal. Except when Mom screams," Olivia said, and a shiver went down my spine at the thought of it. "Something happened with that truck. I just wish they would tell us," my sister whispered. "Me too. And Dad is acting even stranger. He doesn't even acknowledge her screams." We both sat there for a moment, lost in our thoughts, when we heard the door downstairs close shut, and a little later, the car started running. Olivia looked out the window. "It's Dad. So, Mom's alone downstairs?" We quietly walked down the stairs and made our way to our living room. My mother was sitting on the sofa. In her hand, she held a needle and yarn, but she wasn't moving. She looked completely spaced out. When she noticed us, she slightly moved her face towards us. Her mouth opened, but this time she didn't scream. She just kept it open. I walked over to her and sat down on the ground in front of her. "Please, Mom, talk to us. I don't know if you're trying to protect us from something, but this isn't helping. We're old enough." and we are here for you." "What happened last night?" She blinked and then shook her head as if she were just waking up from a daydream. Her mouth closed again. Her eyes went to me and then to my sister. It's hard to remember. Something keeps blocking my memories. I know that something isn't right, but it's almost as if my mind keeps falling asleep. I can't control it. Olivia came closer and sat down beside me. "Maybe we should take you to a doctor. I mean, the screaming really scares us, Mom." My mother looked confused. "What screaming?" I swallowed. "Do you remember anything about that woman?" "We lost her." Her eyes opened wide. For a moment, it looked as if she were smiling. But then her mouth opened so much that her face got all wrinkly. From the looks of it, it was as if she was screaming. But this time, no sound came out. I just grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. Finally, her expression softened. Her eyes and mouth closed for a moment. She looked at the terrified faces of my sister and me. Then she tightly grabbed my arm. She wasn't a woman. I don't know what she was. It all happened so fast. But kids, a tear rolled down her cheek. "I saw your father die. I don't know who that man is that came back to us." Dread filled my entire body. It felt as if a dark blanket was falling over us. I heard my mother's words, but I just couldn't believe her. I didn't want to. Suddenly, I heard the door slam shut. Olivia got up and pulled out her phone. She was just about to call an ambulance when my father walked into the room. My mother's face changed again. She was smiling, genuinely smiling. "Mom isn't feeling well." "I'm calling a doctor for her," Olivia said with a trembling voice. She looked at me, and I saw how afraid she was of my dad. She was trying to get us out of here. My father took the phone from her hand and shook his head. "No need. Your mother is fine. Everything is perfectly fine. I was actually thinking we could go to the cinema again tonight." I forced my body to get up. "That sounds like a fine idea. I haven't seen the new Hunger Games movie yet. How about that one?" He smiled. "That sounds like a terrific idea." "Yeah, I haven't seen it yet either," Olivia added. "Can you get our coats from upstairs, Dad?" He got up without a word and walked up the stairs. Olivia and I each grabbed one of my mother's arms. Together, we quickly walked her outside and got her into the car, still wearing our pajamas and no shoes. "Where are we going?" my mother asked from the back seat. "We're going to visit Uncle Freddie," Olivia answered in a shaky voice. "But, honey, we can't just leave your dad here. He'll get lonely." I wish I'd taken a photo. Wish that I'd drawn what it looked like at the time. But I was too ashamed to tell this story until now. Because what happened is partly my fault. I wasn't. I'm a sign language interpreter, and at the time I'd just graduated. Maybe if I'd been better at my job. I saw the gig for the animal tracking and wilderness exploration class, and thought it sounded like a fun experience for a newbie like me, and I really needed the work. So I accepted the job, arrived half an hour early. I was pretty nervous. Back then, anytime meeting a new deaf person was nerve-wracking, because what if I couldn't understand them? What if we didn't jibe? What if they were one of those really fast signers who just have no patience for beginners? And so I went early, hoping I could glean some context for the job and learn her preferred signs for the vocabulary related to the trails. But it was rocky from the get-go. The moment I stepped out of my beat-up Honda and started to introduce myself, she signed, "You're late. You were supposed to be here half an hour ago." "Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe the agency gave me the wrong time," I stammered, my hands fumbling. Of all the days for me to get it wrong, I was already so nervous. I said, "You must be her name was Liani." But in the moment I forgot how to spell it. She quickly corrected me, her fingers so fast I didn't catch more than the L. But then she gave me her name sign, her hand in L shape, and brushed the tip of her thumb against her cheek in a repeat motion. It was an easy one, thank goodness. Then, rolling her eyes, she opened her mouth and spoke aloud in deaf, accented English. Okay, well, the interpreter is here now, so I guess we can get started. Everyone. Trying not to hide how relieved I was that she voiced for herself, I fell into step with her students. There were only 3, a father and son and a middle-aged woman. Is this all? I asked, looking around in surprise. The guide shrugged. It's so cold this morning. A lot of people probably decided to stay in their warm beds. Then she spoke aloud to the trio. The fresh snow is great for seeing tracks. The man and his son were named Damien and Dee. Dee was 9, very excited, and claimed to see a deer in the trees every few minutes. Damien was a laid-back parent who made constant dad jokes. It was apparent he'd mostly brought his son here because of the boy's love of animals. Our last member, Chantal, was a gray-haired woman covered in healing gemstone bracelets, who told us she enjoyed foraging for herbs and mushrooms. The freshly fallen snow had formed a crunchy, icy crust on the surface of the world, and it crunched pleasantly under our boots as we set off on the wintry trail. The sun's rays glistened off the surface of the snow like diamonds. Since the guide didn't need me to voice, my job was relaxingly easy. I signed whenever one of the 3 hearing people interjected a comment or question, or in Damien's case, a silly dad joke. 20 minutes passed on the trail, and then we took a pause so that Dee could wander off into the bushes, because predictably, the little boy needed to pee. While we waited, our guide turned keen eyes to me. She was a spry woman with crow's feet and just a hint gray in her hair. Nice to be an interpreter, huh? She signed. I bet you get to go do all sorts of interesting gigs. This is definitely the coolest, I replied, and I meant it. I told her I mostly interpreted college classes teamed with a more seasoned interpreter because I was still new. Her smirk said, "Yeah, I can tell." But she was gentler now that we were on the trail and remarked, worth coming out on a frigid Saturday morning? Saturday? You mean Friday? No, Saturday. Definitely Friday. I checked my calendar and showed her. Oh, dang. I get so mixed up sometimes. She laughed and the tension broke between us. Then she looked worried. Maybe you were early instead of late. I hope I don't have other students waiting for me back at the parking lot. Oh God, what if I got the time wrong? For a second, her expression clouded over. But then, like the sun piercing the clouds, she grinned as she noticed something in the bushes. Hey! Raspberries! I saw only thorny sticks bowed over into the snow. Our guide chuckled and explained, voicing aloud for the others, that raspberries are pretty easy to identify. These canes grow tall and then loop down to the ground like this. The laterals, that's these side branches, produce the berries. You can recognize them by the leaves, always in a trio. She fingered a few remaining dead leaves. Raspberries, huh? Said Damien, as Dee returned from his pee break to examine the thorny shrubbery. Hey Dee, know how you can tell a raspberry bush? The leaves? He said, echoing our guide. That's her way, but I'll let you in on a secret. Easier way. Damien bent down and whispered loudly in his son's ear, just look for the red berries. Then you know. Raspberry bush. We all just chuckled at Damien's usual dadness, while Dee protested loudly that there are no berries in winter. But everyone forgot the berries when our guide pointed out animal prints up ahead in the snow. Our first tracks, the 2 oval indents, were deer hoof prints, marching through the snow across our path and into the trees. Dee immediately wanted to follow, but our guide convinced him we should stick to the trail. Soon, we identified rabbit and squirrel tracks, as well as some bird prints. But then, just as we reached a dip in the trail leading to a narrow stream, our guide frowned at a set of very large prints. They came from the trail beyond and vanished into the stream in front of us and looked almost like human feet. Almost. but with longer toes. It was difficult for her to get a clear sense of the prints, she told us, because whatever creature made them was shuffling along through the snow, making the prints blurred and elongated. Oh, mystery, Damien nudged Dee. Let's follow them, squealed Dee. Is it safe? It's not a bear, is it? Wondered Chantal. No, not a bear. Definitely not, the guide assured us. She eyed the tracks again, frowning. They came down the very trail we'd be taking if we crossed the stream, but because the tracks went into the stream, presumably coming out somewhere else, if we followed them, we'd be heading in the direction the animal came from, not the direction it was going to, meaning we were unlikely to run into it. Anyway, there weren't any large dangerous animals in these woods, according to our guide. After pondering for a moment, she declared we could finish the trail loop. Once we crested the hill, it would curve around across a meadow and take us back to the parking lot. What if they're human tracks? Chantal said. Last year, a hiker went missing here. What if it's them? Our guide looked skeptical. Are you sure you aren't thinking of a different park? I've worked here for years and never heard of anyone going missing, except one hiker who got found a day or two later. It was definitely here, insists Chantal. I remember because I avoided coming here for months because of it, even though I live pretty close by. The story just scared me. A hiker wouldn't be wandering out here a full year, especially barefoot. There have been dozens of people on this trail since. The guide shrugged. Dee was already up ahead of us, forging across the stream and then dashing through the snow. The tracks lead up here, he shouted. Hey, Dee. Don't run so far, Damien hollered. We all hurried to catch up. Dee had stopped at the crest of the hill and stood there, small in the bright sun, staring at something. As we all caught up, panting and out of breath, we looked to see what had captivated his attention. Here at the hill's crest, the trail forked. In one direction, it descended across a wide field, slowly looping back towards the woods and stream, and presumably the parking lot where we'd started. In the other direction, the tracks followed the trail through dense trees and into a cleft in a rocky cliff face, vanishing into darkness. Which way do we go? Asked Chantal, turning to look along the sunnier trail. But Dee kept pointing to the tracks and the cave and saying, Please, let's follow the tracks. Please? Can't we see what's there? I don't know, buddy, said Damien. You sure you want to go into a spooky dark cave? Yes. The guide, meanwhile, pursed her lips. She caught my eye and signed. They could be human tracks. If they are, they're barefoot and the way they're dragging their feet in the snow. They need help. If there's any camping material in that cave. Maybe it's someone who got stuck out here. But her eyes narrowed on the cliff wall. She motioned me to join her, and we followed the footprints through the trees. Dee immediately tailed us, which meant so did everyone else. As we approached the split in the rock face, the guide paused and signed to me. I'm going to see what's in there. The thing is, I've hiked these trails for years. I don't remember there being a fork like this. It's strange. This shouldn't be here. I need to check and see what's going on. Stay with going on, the group. I'll let you know if it's safe, and just ends up being an empty cave or something. Are you sure you don't want me to? Stay, she signed. Then she turned and called aloud to the other three. Stay here. I'm going to go check and make sure it's safe. The wait for our guide's return seemed forever. We had left the sun behind and stood in the shade of that rocky cliff. The temperature felt as if it had plummeted 20 degrees, and not just a chill on my skin, but the cold seemed to have injected into my very veins, an ice epic of terror that increased with every passing moment. My heart rate escalated. Suddenly, I thought maybe I understood what people meant when they talked about negative energy. The path was wrong. It shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be here. And the tracks, something human or not quite human. What did that even mean? The wait for our guide seemed an eternity. Finally, the crunch of snow and relief whooshed out of me in a sigh as the guide appeared at the mouth of the opening and called, "It's safe. Everyone, come on." Dee bolted ahead. Damien and Chantal followed. The guide called again, the same phrase. "It's safe. Everyone, come on." But her hands were moving. The others probably thought she was signing, "Let's go." Looking back, I wish I'd had more experience. Wish I'd trusted my eyes more. Because maybe then I would have shouted a warning. If I'd been a more experienced interpreter, could I have stopped what happened? I don't know. I was still trying to make it all out, confused because my ears and eyes contradicted each other. Her voice said, "It's safe. Everyone come on." But the pointer finger of her right hand slid between the splayed fingers of her left and jerked outward, a motion that looked as if her pointer finger were escaping. "Run. Run. Run." "Don't follow her," I shouted. Too late. Dee and Chantal had already gone in. Now there was only me. The guide looked at me, her face contorted, lips pulling back over teeth and gums. For a moment, she looked like a long-ago rotted corpse. The flesh withered away. Then I blinked, and she was smiling. An ordinary smile. Her hands lifted, spasmed, and shook. And then, instead of telling me to escape, her arms gestured stiffly, like those of a marionette. Now, her voice and gestures matched as she said, "Come on." I fled. Reaching the parking lot, I was stunned to find a group mingling in the snow. A young deaf woman with long black hair stood at the front of the group, signing angrily at her phone screen. "Hey," I waved at her. "Hey, are you from the wilderness group? I need help." Oh, finally. She whirled to face me, demanding to know why I was late. Her hands flew fast, so fast. Flustered, I interrupted, trying to explain to her about our guide. "What the hell are you talking about?" She interrupted my spelling the name to sign to me. "I am Leilani." What? So who had I been interpreting for? It turns out the name sign I showed her, the L hand brushed against my cheek, belonged to a woman named Lorelei, who'd had previously been the trail guide, and had mentored and later hired on Leilani. "Lorelei's been missing since last year," she explained. "She disappeared when she was taking a group out on the trail. She went to check some strange tracks and never came back. Last year, had the trek been on a Saturday, 10 instead of 11 my blood froze. Suddenly, all the misunderstood details made sense. Leilani, the real Leilani, insisted I lead her to the fork in the trail where her mentor had vanished into the cave. We followed the crisp, clear prints in the snow, all the way to the stream and up the crest of the hill. There was no longer any fork. In fact, no one's footsteps but mine emerged from the other side of the stream. It appeared as if I had gone up the slope, turned myself around in a circle a few times up there, and then run along the path, looping back to the parking lot. But as we got back to the parking lot, I noticed something. In the crisp snow, the impressions our boots had made were clear. There were mine, Damien's, Dee's, and Chantal's, big boots, little boots, all with differing treads. But as for Lorelei's, I couldn't find any boots matching the ones I'd seen her wearing. The final set of prints among our group from the parking lot, shuffling around in the place where Lorelei had stood, were barefoot with elongated toes.